For 40 years, the town of Willow Creek had known Samuel Harper and Eleanor Whitmore as an inseparable pair, but never as lovers. They were the kind of friends people stopped questioning long ago, too steady, too familiar, too woven into each other's lives to be anything scandalous. They grew old together in plain sight, sharing laughter, silence, and the slow passing of seasons, yet never crossing the invisible line everyone assumed must exist. Samuel was the town's quiet backbone. A widower since his early 30s, he lived in a weathered farmhouse on the edge of Willow Creek, where the fields rolled endlessly like waves of gold. He had hands shaped by labor and a face carved by responsibility. After his wife, Margaret, died during childbirth, taking their unborn son with her, Samuel closed a door inside himself that never fully reopened. He raised no children, remarried no one, and devoted his life to land, livestock, and duty. Eleanor arrived in Willow Creek the same year Samuel buried his wife. She was newly divorced, carrying a single suitcase and a heartbreak she never spoke of. She took the position of schoolteacher and rented the small white cottage across from the church. Her laughter was gentle, her eyes observant, as though she were always measuring the world but rarely judging it. When Samuel brought fresh eggs to the schoolhouse one morning, a habit started that would last decades. At first their friendship was simple, practical. Samuel fixed Eleanor's fence. Eleanor baked him pies he never asked for but always finished. They walked to town together on Sundays and sat side by side at community gatherings. When rumors began to flutter, quiet questions wrapped in polite smiles, they ignored them. They had both loved deeply and lost painfully. Neither wished to tempt fate again. Years layered themselves gently over their lives. Eleanor taught generations of children to read and write, watched them grow, marry, and bring their own children to her classroom. Samuel expanded his farm, survived droughts and floods, and became the man people sought when something needed doing right. Through it all, they remained constants in each other's orbit. They never spoke of why they never married. Sometimes, late in the evenings, Eleanor would sit on her porch with a shawl around her shoulders, watching the lights in Samuel's farmhouse glow across the fields. Sometimes Samuel would pause in the barn doorway, hearing Eleanor's piano drift faintly through the night air. There was comfort in knowing someone else was awake in the world with you. Then came the winter that changed everything. Eleanor fell ill suddenly, a fever that refused to break. Samuel found her collapsed near the fireplace, her skin burning and her breathing shallow. For 3 days and nights he barely left her side, feeding her broth, changing cold cloths, whispering encouragement he didn't realize he carried inside him. When she finally opened her eyes and smiled weakly at him, something fragile but powerful shifted between them. "You stayed," she murmured. "Of course," he replied, the word automatic, and yet heavier than it had ever been before. After that winter, time felt less forgiving. Eleanor's steps slowed. Samuel's hands stiffened in the mornings. They both began to notice how many things they took for granted, how easily one life could slip away while the other stood helpless nearby. One spring afternoon, Eleanor received a letter. She read it 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it back into the envelope. That evening, when Samuel arrived with his usual basket of produce, she invited him in and poured 2 cups of tea. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. The words struck him harder than any loss he had known in years. "Leaving?" he echoed. "For where?" "My sister in Oregon. She's ill. She wants me there." Eleanor said, her voice steady but her hands trembling, "I don't know how long I'll be gone." Samuel nodded, swallowing something thick in his throat. "You should go," he said, because that was the right thing to say. They said good. Bye without drama, no tears, no confessions, just a long embrace that lingered a second too long, carrying all the words they had never allowed themselves to speak. Months passed, then a year. Letters arrived regularly at first, filled with small details, weather, neighbors, memories of Willow Creek. Gradually they grew fewer, shorter, until one day they stopped altogether. Samuel told himself not to worry. Eleanor had always been strong, independent. He returned to his routines, but the farm felt emptier, quieter, as though something essential had been removed. Then, on a bright autumn morning, a carriage rolled up the long dirt road to his farmhouse. Samuel stood in the yard, confused, as Eleanor stepped down. Older, thinner, but unmistakably herself. She wore a simple dress and a veil. His heart stumbled. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't have much time, Samuel," she said, "but I don't want to spend what I have left being only your friend." He stared at her, the weight of 40 years pressing between them. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she continued, taking a step closer, "that I've loved you since the day you brought eggs to my classroom, and I was afraid to lose you, afraid to change what we had. But I'm more afraid now of dying without ever being your wife." Silence stretched. The wind moved softly through the fields. Samuel felt something inside him finally give way, a dam holding back decades of restraint. "I loved you too," he said, the words rough but true. "I just thought it was kinder not to ask for more." They were married that afternoon in the farmhouse parlor, with the pastor, 2 neighbors, and 40 years of unspoken love standing witness. The months that followed were both joyful and heartbreaking. Eleanor's health declined, but her spirit seemed lighter than it had ever been. They shared mornings, stories, quiet touches that carried the weight of a lifetime. Samuel learned that love did not vanish with age. It deepened, sharpened, demanded courage even at the end. When Eleanor passed one early morning, as sunlight crept through the curtains, Samuel held her hand and whispered the only regret he had left. "I should have married you sooner." Years later, people in Willow Creek would speak of Samuel Harper's unexpected wedding as a strange, beautiful thing. They would say love had finally caught up with time, but Samuel knew the truth. Love had always been there. They had simply needed 40 years to be brave enough to claim it.